Thank you all for coming. It's so good to see people interested in Yemen. I'm quite nervous because I can see a few Yemen experts in the audience and they always intimidate me, so I'll try my best. Today when I was thinking about what to speak about, it was really difficult because we're talking about wrapping 5 very turbulent years in Yemen's history. A lot has happened in the last couple of years. I started working as a journalist when the revolutions first kicked off in 2011, and I was very lucky to be in Yemen at the time, and so I've been covering the situation ever since. And mainly at the start I was actually following the Houthis, and then I spent a lot of time with the government and Ali Abdullah Saleh, and most recently I came back from covering the war in Yemen. And so I've kind of overlooked the main events that have happened. So when I was thinking about how I would take you through everything that's happened the last couple of years, I decided I would take you on a journey with one main person who has stuck with me throughout my time following Yemen. And that person is my good friend, if I can find a picture of him, Ali Al-Ahmad. So Ali Al-Ahmad is going to be a special person that you're going to hear about a lot throughout my talk today. It's really hard to understand how we got to where Yemen is today without really understanding what happened prior to September 2013, when the Houthis actually took over the capital city, Sana'a. And unfortunately, the media seems to kind of focus on that one point and make it seem like it's black and white. But there's a lot more to the conflict in Yemen than just since 2013. And hopefully when you go home from this talk, you will understand more about what happened prior to that, when Ali Abdullah Saleh was still in power, and then when he was ousted, and what happened after he was ousted when President Hadi came into power that really got us to where we are today. So I'm going to start with when I first met my good friend Ali Al-Ahmad. So I met my friend Ali Al-Ahmad after the 6th war in Sada, which happened in 2011. And I met him in Change Square, where there was thousands of protesters. He was at a tent, and I was a new journalist, and I didn't really know much about Yemen at the time, surprisingly. And I was just asking loads of protesters why they were there. And a lot of them gave me the same answers. You know, we want democracy. We want to get rid of Ali Abdullah Saleh. Enough is enough. You know, poverty was on a rise. Yemen's economic situation was deteriorating. Throughout Ali Abdullah Saleh's whole time, not one public hospital was ever opened. You know, there was so much corruption during his time, and people wanted change. But the reason why Ali Al-Ahmad is different is because he had a different answer. He told me, "Have you heard about the Houthis?" And at the time, to be honest, I was quite ignorant. I had no idea who the Houthis were. And so he told me about the Houthis and their struggle. He told me about the intermittent fighting against the Houthis and the government since 2004. He told me how the government had actually allied with Saudi Arabia to fight against the Houthis in Sada, which is the northern area in Yemen. Since 2004, 6 wars had been waged. He told me about the lives that were lost and the destruction that had happened in their area when the country was led by President Ali Abdullah Saleh. And I remember that when I went into Ali Al-Ahmad's tent, I saw a sticker that really stuck out to me, and it was this one, which I'm sure you guys have come across a lot lately, which says, "God is great, death to America, death to Israel, and curse upon the Jews, and victory to Islam." And this is the Houthi logo. And at the time I thought, this is pretty extreme, like, should I actually be in this tent? And he told me, you know, if you go to Sada, you'll understand why this is our logo. And Ali Al-Ahmad is a pretty cool guy, actually. He speaks English, he's got an American accent, he's traveled around, and so I was surprised to see this stuck in his tent. So I was very curious, and I told Ali Al-Ahmad that I have to go to Sada. Like, I need to go to Sada and see what you're talking about. And he said, "You can try, but you're never going to get in." And it was only when I actually started making my way into Sada that I realized what he was talking about. So when I was trying to get into Sada, there was around 20 checkpoints. Majority of them were held by Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was the president at the time. and a few by the Houthis. And the idea behind these checkpoints is that Ali Abdullah Saleh was put all his power in making sure that no one knew what was happening in Sada. And this is how my first film called Sada, The Untold Story came about. I'm just going to show you a minute or so from that film, which, if I can find, yeah.
I'm on my way to Sada right now, which is a 6-hour drive from Sana'a. I'm a little nervous about getting in because they're not letting any journalists in, especially with the unstable and fragile state that the country is in right now. But I've taken all of the... I'm on my way to Sada right now, which is a 6-hour drive from Sana'a. I'm a little nervous about getting in because they're not letting any journalists in, especially with the unstable and fragile state that the country is in right now. But I've taken all of the Houthis with me, and I'm going to cover up even further to blend into their society and pretend that I'm part of his family.
So this
My trip had to be carefully planned, with over 15 checkpoints leading up to Sada, some under Houthi control and others from the government. I had to have a good reason to enter the uncharted territory and try to avoid from being another detained or deported journalist. So I used a discreet handycam hidden at the bottom of my bag. Most of the checkpoints were controlled by the government. They have never allowed any journalists or tourists into Sada. The only information the world has received about Sada and the conflict has been through the Yemeni government's media, until now. I was met upon arrival by Ali, one of the villagers in Sada. For his own security, I can't mention his surname. He was very welcoming and wanted to help me show the world the struggle the people of Sada had been living since the first war erupted in 2004. I asked him why they hadn't spoken out before.
So that's just a minute from the film. But basically, it was very difficult to get into Sada. And how we got in is that I was dressed in a... You thought I wasn't covered enough already. I was covered up even further. So they put me in like a tent-like veil. Even my eyes were covered. I was wearing gloves, boots, you name it. But it also happened to help me cover my filming equipment. So I had it all hidden underneath my legs. And it helps being a woman because no one's going to ask you at a checkpoint to get out of the car. You just put your head down and you can get in. So I was able to get into Sada. And when I went to Sada, the Houthis actually organized to have a young, I think, 13-year-old, 14-year-old boy come with me with an AK-47. And he was my brother in the taxi that took us to Sada. And we made it in. So during my trip, I had testimony after testimony of families who'd lost their fathers, their mothers, their sons, their daughters. And of course, in 6 wars, there was a lot of casualties and a lot of death. But it was only when I saw the destruction and also the remnants and remains of weapons and munitions that Saudi Arabia had used and the Yemeni government had used that were all US-made weapons and ammunition. And then I could understand where their logo came from. Death to America, curse to the Jews. It all made sense. They'd been bombing them for the last 10 years. For the last, 6 years, sorry. So the anti-US sentiment was very widespread there. So I was taken to the Houthi safe house in Sada where I met some of the Houthi leadership. And I did interview after interview. But one thing that now I think about when I think about what Yemen is going through today is one of the Houthi leaders saying that we will never allow the scenario of Ali Abdullah Saleh repeat itself. And I'm going to come back to this quote that he told me back then. After I left Sada, it wasn't long before the Arab Spring spread across the region and Ali Abdullah Saleh was ousted. And he was swiftly replaced by his vice president, Abdullah Mansour Hadi. I was in England at the time actually, and I flew in right away back to Yemen to see the transfer of power. And I remember calling my good friend Ali Al-Ahmad from the Change Square and saying, congratulations, you got rid of Saleh, everyone's got what they wanted now. And he told me, no, we're not happy. While everyone else had packed their bags and left Change Square, the Houthis remained. Because the Houthis weren't happy that maybe Ali Abdullah Saleh has left, but all the corrupt politicians beneath him had remained. And when the 6 wars against the Houthis were waged, yes, Ali Abdullah Saleh was president, but it was the Islah Party, the brigades of the Islah Party that physically went into Sada and were fighting against the Houthis. And while they remained in power, the Houthis weren't happy. They didn't see a change. So after that, the Houthis remained in Change Square. But it was really in 2013 when the national dialogue began and they took part in the national dialogue, that everyone was shocked that the Houthis were taking part. Because by taking part in the national dialogue, it was as if they were kind of approving of President Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi. They actually played a big part in the national dialogue, and a lot of people that speak of the national dialogue now say that the Houthis had good suggestions in the national dialogue. But while the government were all in Mozambique, and they spent 2 years only focused on the national dialogue, they completely forgot about what was happening on the ground. There was a complete power vacuum in Yemen. None of the basic needs of the people were met. The people were neglected. All the government were in this beautiful hotel, but not once did they ever make a statement to the people. President Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi never addressed his people, I think, once when he was in power. And so people felt neglected. And it was these continuous mistakes that were made by the government that the Houthis used when they rose to power. The first thing that happened was the government wasn't receiving as much aid anymore from countries like the Gulf and the other countries that were giving us aid beforehand. And so they were forced, because Yemen's economy was failing, to lift the subsidies off of fuel. And of course, when you lift the subsidies off of fuel, everything's prices increases. And especially when poverty is on rise and unemployment is on a rise, and you're saying you need to lift the subsidies, so everything's going to become more expensive. It was the one time that people were really getting angry towards the government. And the Houthis seized this opportunity. The first thing they did was go out on the streets and protest against the lifting of the subsidies. And everyone joined them, not because they believed in Houthis' ideology or they believed in the politics that the Houthis believed in, but only because they were angry that prices were going to rise and that the subsidies were lifted. And the government actually responded and then put the subsidies back on. So people felt like these are people that could actually bring change. When we're not happy, these people will help us go out on the streets and get what we need. So the support for the Houthis at that point was increasing dramatically. And they grew into this broad national movement. They were calling themselves Ansarullah, which means God's allies. And they were actually fighting against AQAP, which was spreading around the country. And one other thing that they did is that when corruption, in the new government, corruption was actually on the rise more than the previous government. They started this initiative saying that they're the Revolutionary Committee campaign, which went into state institutions and started confronting politicians that were corrupt and taking the money that was stolen back into the government. And everyone had so much faith in the Houthis. But while that all sounds nice and good, they also cost the Yemen's economy millions, and they never had a plan B. They didn't know what was next. They just saw all this support, and they got really excited, and they were overwhelmed, but they never knew what the next step ever was. There was never a plan. At the beginning of 2015, things got really out of control. They were gaining a lot of support, and the government was intimidated. The national dialogue came to an end, and none of the points that came out of the national dialogue were actually ever implemented. And so we were in this transitional phase where everything was out of place and no one knew. No one took the lead and knew what was going to happen next. It was truly surreal experience to see the Houthis gaining so much strength. When they were making their way from Sada to Sana'a, and this is a really pivotal moment in Yemen's history, there wasn't actually that much resistance when they were coming through. And what was really surprising is this is when we really saw the alliance between Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president actually waged 6 wars against the Houthis, and the Houthis, this is when it was really formed. So as they were making their way from Sa'da to Sana'a, army brigades that were loyal to Ali Abdullah Saleh joined the Houthis and were making their way with them. And there was just no way that the brigades that are loyal to President Hadi could actually resist, because the army that's loyal to President Ali Abdullah Saleh, which is 70% of the army, is the better equipped, better trained army. They made it into Sana'a, and overnight, I was in Yemen, overnight there was Houthi graffiti all over Sana'a. There were new checkpoints being set up and old ones quickly being painted with the Houthi logo. But it's really important to remember that the Houthis could have never made it this far had it not been for the support of Ali Abdullah Saleh and for the numerous mistakes that were made by President Hadi in the first few years of his rule. So the alliance between Ali Abdullah Saleh, the unlikely alliance between Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis was strengthened. And they had one common enemy, and that common enemy was the Islah. The Islah, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, are Ali Abdullah Saleh's enemies because they were his cousins, and they were the ones that led the revolution in 2011, and they were the ones that got him out of power. And they were the Houthis' enemy because they were the ones that really waged the war, the 6 wars against the Houthis. And so what used to be previous enemies became new allies because now they had a common enemy in place. So they pushed out the Muslim Brotherhood from Yemen. What are they going to do next? But at the end of February in 2015, actually not the end of February, in September, okay, I've lost my track now.
2014.
Huh? Yeah, 2014. So they held President Hadi under house arrest in his own home. They were completely in control of the capital, they were completely in control of the institutions, and it was in February 2015 that President Hadi was able to escape his house arrest and he fled to Aden. He had previously actually resigned, and when he got to Aden he retracted his resignation and he declared the Houthi administration illegitimate. And it was really then that the war began. The Houthis followed Hadi, which was a very stupid move, in my opinion. They followed President Hadi to Aden, and they held the city under siege. And Hadi fled the country and resurfaced 2 weeks later in Riyadh. And that's when the war on Yemen was declared.
Yemen on the south.
Sorry?
On Yemen on the south.
On Yemen as a whole, by the Saudis, yeah. Which continues to this present day. Now, I came across Ali Al-Ahmad, my good friend from Change Square, again when I went to, in March 2015, it was the first round of Geneva talks in Switzerland, the Geneva Peace Talks. And I was sitting in the lobby waiting for the delegates to come with all the journalists. And then I see Ali Al-Ahmad come out of the lift, and I'm really confused because Ali Al-Ahmad and me are pretty much the same age. When we met at the tent, we were talking about what we wanted to do next with our lives, and we were the youth of the Change Square. And so I was surprised to see Ali Al-Ahmad from Sada come out of the lift, and I was excited because he's my friend, so I wanted to go and say hello. So as I got up to go say hello, I see all the journalists run up to Ali Al-Ahmad and huddle around him. I was really confused. I was like, why is everyone standing around Ali Al-Ahmad? And then I realized that he was one of the leadership of the Houthi delegation for the Swiss peace talks. So I went to say hello, and I was like, hey Ali, someone got a promotion. And he turned around and he was like, excuse me, you will call me Mr. Ali from now on. And why Ali is so important? Because he really, for me, kind of resembles the rise of the Houthis. How they were really unqualified for this rise. They don't know what's going to happen next. Whenever I see Ali till now, he doesn't know what's going to happen next. They went from being the marginalized group in the north of Sada to now having control of the majority of the north of the country. And they're being used by Ali Abdullah Saleh for him to regain power. So today we are 10 months into this war. The Houthis still have control of the from the majority of the north of the country. There's a lot of fighting going on. The Houthis are holding Taiz siege, airstrikes are relentless, and over 5,000, over 5,000 people have been killed, more than half of them are civilians, and no one really knows what's happening next. The last time I saw Ali Al-Ahmad was in the Sheba Hotel in Sana'a when I went to Yemen in October. And when I saw him in Sana'a, he was really tired and he was very stressed. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing next? And he said, we don't know. Because the truth is, neither side know what they're doing next. And it's really the people on the ground that are bearing the brunt of this war and having to put up with the relentless airstrikes, the relentless Houthi shelling, the snipers. And the only way we're going to come out of this conflict is if both sides start to realize that a complete military victory is impossible. And the only way that peace can be achieved is through diplomatic and peaceful negotiations, like the next round of peace talks. And what I want everyone to take home from this talk is to really put pressure on your MPs and on your government to stop fueling the fire in the war in Yemen, to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia, to make people more aware of what's happening on the ground. Someone actually told me, tried to explain the war in Yemen to me with a little anecdote, which was really interesting. And he said, think of Yemen as an airplane at Heathrow Airport. Okay. This airplane has 26 million passengers. Now the 26 million passengers, the airplane has flown out and it was hijacked. But it was only able to be hijacked because the airport security allowed it to be hijacked. And now that it's up in the air, and I'm saying it's hijacked as in it's hijacked by the Houthis. Now that it's up in the air, the security at the bottom don't know how to bring it down, so instead they're trying to shoot it down relentlessly until it will fall and collapse on the ground. But isn't it unfair for the 26 million people inside the airplane? Shouldn't we try and get the security and the hijackers to negotiate and bring them down safely? And that's what's happening in Yemen. The airplane is up there, and they're going to keep shooting it down until everyone inside it is dead. 71% of the public sector is now unemployed, so that's 71% of people without jobs. The malnutrition rates have risen by 200% amongst children. Poverty is on the rise. The AQAP and the Islamic State are roaming free on the ground. People haven't had electricity for the last 10 months of war. Imagine not having electricity for 10 months. There's no longer any water. The list goes on. I could go on for ages. So we really, really need to get the word out and do what we can to save Yemen from the humanitarian catastrophe that it's facing today. That's all I have to say. Thank you.